Hi everyone, I'm back and here to show you how to dissect a squid. So the squids that we're dissecting today just came from the market again. So these are food grade squid. They can just be composted after the dissection. First we're going to take a look at some of the external features and then we will dissect and see what we have inside. So if we look at right up here, we have the squid's fin. That's going to be helping it with direction or changing directions while it's swimming. This whole tube portion here is the mantle. We've got our head here, and the eyes, and then we've got arms. And we have these little skinny ones here that are the tentacles. We'll take a closer look with these and kind of zoom in and see the squid kind of piece by piece. While we have it on this side, a couple things that I do want to show you. Right here we have a little point, and that's going to be the tip of the pen. So the pen is kind of the main hard portion, or the closest thing to a shell that's within the squid. What you can actually do is get a good grip on that tip portion, and then hold it, and if you're lucky and your squid cooperates, you can actually remove the pen. Alright, once you have enough of the pen exposed, you can just gently pull, and out comes the pen. So there we go, there's that hard portion of the squid. Another thing that's fairly cool here, you can see that there are spots all over the squid. Those are called chromatophores. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. So these chromatophores are what allows the squid to some ability to change color, either for camouflage or potentially for mating purposes. But what's quite interesting is, even though these squids have been dead and frozen for a long time, you can get a little friction going there, rub it back and forth, and you can actually see that the spots will get a bit larger, and you'll actually get more of those chromatophores showing up. So a really fun little thing to try. Now let's turn the squid over and look at the other side of it. So some of the key features, well really one of the only key features that we can see on this side that we couldn't on the other, is this piece here. So that is the siphon, or the funnel, and this will help them with locomotion. They'll essentially take a bunch of liquid up into the mantle and then push it out through the siphon. They can actually direct that in different directions. Now let's zoom in a little closer and look at some different zones of the squid body. So we can take a look here. The squid will have 8 arms, and all of those arms will have suckers all the way down the length of them. You can see that fairly well on, let's just get that separated a bit more. You can see that fairly well on this one here, that we have little suckers going all the way down. And then in addition to that, there will be 2 tentacles. So we have one that's over here and one that's over here. Sorry, that's just out of view. There we go. There's our tentacle. And at the end of the tentacle here is an area called the club, which is a very small area that actually has some suckers on it. So the tentacles are primarily for reaching out and capturing prey. The arms will help to direct that prey in towards the mouth. Now this might be a little tricky. If I angle my squid in the right way, kind of move the arms out of the way, we'll be able to see this central portion here. You'll be able to see a little dark bit. So this area here is our mouth, and the dark part is the beak. So I can reach in there with a set of forceps, and I should be able to pull out 2 halves of the beak. There we go. It's mostly transparent, so it's probably a little difficult to see, but I've got 1 half of the beak there. Looks a fair bit like a little bird beak. And then the other half. It's right here. Let's put it against the blue there. There we go. So there's the 2 halves of our squid beak. These are made out of keratin, just like a bird's beak. And now that I've moved my arms off to the side, we can start to see that the mouth is actually hanging out within kind of a bulb-shaped area. And that's going to be what's called our buccal bulb. We can actually isolate this a little bit more so that we can see the buccal bulb. So what I usually do is just separate the arms a little bit here. I would use a set of scissors, and I'm just making a cut just in between the arms there. And then we can just pull a bit more tissue aside. Need to free up just a little bit more tissue. And now we can see here we have our buccal bulb. Now from the buccal bulb you could even cut up a little bit further, get a little closer to that siphon. Do it carefully though. And now I'm not sure if this is actually going to show up on film, but what I can do is I can actually tug on the buccal bulb or buccal bulb, depends who's pronouncing it. And I can actually start to see the squid's esophagus. So if I pull there, you can start to see that tube. So essentially food would come in here, make its way through the buccal bulb. You can actually do this with a blunt probe. And then you can start to see the blunt probe on the opposite end there. It might look like I'm just poking right through it, but there actually is a layer of transparent tissue in there. And that can even continue all the way up into the kind of visceral cavity of the squid. Now the main part of our dissection here, most of what we're going to be observing, is hidden away under the mantle. So this is probably the simplest dissection in terms of the actual cuts that we make. All you need to do is kind of pinch the mantle like this. Make sure that your squid is oriented so that the siphon is facing up. Pinch here, and then we're just using our scissors to cut the mantle open. Then we can just move those to either side. And we can see our internal anatomy. I'm just gonna cut this membrane a little bit because it's just gonna make things a little easier. Now, one unfortunate thing about going through this squid dissection is that most of what's going on internally is white in color. So it can be a little bit difficult to differentiate the different parts here, but I will do my best to help you go through it. One of the most obvious parts in here that you'll probably notice first is this silver part. This is the ink sac. And running alongside the ink sac, I'm almost certain you won't be able to see this in the video, but kind of running along the surface of the ink sac is a little clear tube, and that's going to be the animal's rectum. So essentially, water for locomotion, also ink, and also feces will all be making its way out through the siphon or funnel. As I tug on the siphon there, you can see these two kind of bands that kind of come up to the surface. So these are the siphon retractor muscles, and that's going to be what allows the squid to control the direction of the funnel. There's actually a couple on the other side too, but we're not as able to see it just because of how the internal organs are laid out. Another important piece, you'll often see these little weird bits off to the side. I think it's actually quite appropriate that this one has a lot of bubbles around it because this is the animal's gills. So very important for respiration. And if you actually put a squid, even if it's, a dead one like this, if you float it in some water, you'll actually be able to see that these gills are quite feathery. At the top of each gill, we've got a slightly discolored area here in a circle, and that's going to be our gill heart, or our brachial heart. So we have two of those, one at the top of each gill. And then we have this little region here. Now, right underneath this little part is the systemic heart. So that's going to be what pumps the blood throughout the squid's body. The gill hearts are going to be pumping fluid over the gills. So the squid does have 3 separate hearts. Just before we move on from it here, you'll often see a yellowish portion in between the siphon retractor muscles, and that's going to be the liver. And hanging out within the liver is where we'll find the esophagus. Sometimes you can notice it a little bit better if you just kind of pull here. You might be able to notice our tube making its way up here, so that's going to be our esophagus. Now is where things start to get a little bit trickier. So underneath this mass here will be where we can find the stomach. However, it's not really easily visible, so we usually don't have you differentiate that. What we do have you differentiate, though, is this kind of fluid-filled pouch that's typically a kind of yellowish or brownish color. This is the cecum. That's going to have a role in food storage. And this is a male squid. So up at the top here we have a smooth white portion, which is the testes. And then above the testes, we have some more reproductive structures going on here. So we have this little circular bit here, that is the spermatophoric organ. We have this line going across here, which is our vas deferens. And we have this large section here that looks like kind of has little like tube-like structures in there, and that's going to be our spermatophoric sac. And then kind of at the base of our spermatophoric sac, like just below our spermatophoric organ, we'll be able to find, often we can find a tube that's got a little bit of white tissue in there. Kind of looks similar to the gills, but it's in a different place. And this is actually the squid's penis. So all of these white thread-like structures are the specially packaged spermatophores that will then be ultimately transferred over to a female squid. I will be back in just a moment to show you the differences in the female anatomy. So I have opened up a female squid here. The big obvious thing that tells me that this is a female is these two kind of oval shaped pieces here. These are the nidamental glands. You can see just peeking out from the nidamental glands is where you'll find the ink sac. Now these nidamental glands are important in eggshell formation. They play an important role with that. In terms of looking at the internal anatomy though, they get to be a little bit of a bother because they are so large and they cover so many other important parts of the squid. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove them. You should do the same if you stumble across a female. So there's a couple different approaches here. I usually like to kind of loosen things up with my blunt probe and then get in there with the scissors to help separate the membrane. See how I'm kind of lifting the nidamental glands as I do that, so trying not to damage any of the other organ structures underneath. And we'll just get those right out of the way. So now that we've removed the nidamental glands, we can see these two little pink ovals, and those are our accessory nidamental glands. We can also see our gills, just like in the male. Our ink sac, a lot more of it is visible now. Can still see our brachial hearts, our systemic heart hiding out under there. And then we see this big white kind of gland here. This is called the oviducal gland. We still have our liver down here, our esophagus as a very clear tube in the middle of the liver, and then our kind of, if we get to the tip of the ink sac there, we'll be able to also find that clear tube underneath it, which is the rectum. And then most of what we're seeing up above here is all going to be ovary. So this squid is a very mature female. She is basically ready to lay eggs. We'll get them fertilized and then lay them. You'll see that we're not seeing that kind of yellowish sac, the cecum. It is still there, but it's just a clear, thin membrane. The reason for that is that when squids get to a reproductive stage, they tend to stop feeding and actually divert energy away from their digestive organs and towards their reproductive organs. So since this one is quite mature and has these well-developed ovaries, this one is going to be in a reproductive stage. See if I can get a little more detail visible for you. So it's a little difficult to see on the film, but we do actually have little individual kind of bubbles on there, and that's going to be the eggs, the ova. In terms of the external anatomy of the female, it's basically exactly the same as the male. There is a small difference in the structure of the two arms that are kind of centered right near the funnel. However, it's a subtle difference, and I wouldn't expect that you would be able to tell the difference between a male and female based on the arm structure. I would expect you to be able to tell the difference by seeing a nidamental gland or not, and then this top area tends to be, at least when it's fully mature, it'll be almost yellowish and have like a bumpy structure to it if it's a female, whereas in the male that would be pretty much solid white with the kind of overlying striated white structure over top of it. Here I've got two male squids side by side, and I just wanted to quickly point out some of the differences that you may see when these squids are at different kind of ages or reproductive stages. So we can see that this smaller squid here has a fairly significant cecum that is quite full of this kind of yellowish liquid. So this tells us that this squid has been actively eating and digesting. Whereas if we look at this one here, this larger squid, we're not really seeing a cecum at all. Instead, we're seeing a lot more space dedicated to the testes and the spermatophoric sac. So I can actually kind of feel around and find the area that would be the cecum, but it's completely empty. We've just got kind of a little bubble around there. So this would show us that this squid is in a reproductive stage. It really isn't feeding at all at this point, and all of its energy is being diverted towards reproduction.